In her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, Ursula Le Guin describes something that may actually be incomprehensible for many of us. She describes a place where everybody is simply happy. In her story, this place is the city of Omelas. It's described as basically the perfect place. Amazing views, amazing architecture, music, festivals, everybody and everything acting harmonious and pleasant, humans getting along with animals and with nature, etc., etc. Ursula Le Guin makes clear that this city of Omelas is not some stereotypical utopia or mythological story. This is simply a place where everybody is happy. In the story, this is important to emphasize because I think that as humans, we sometimes have a tendency to look at other people's happiness and maybe even our own happiness, and the instinct is sometimes to poke holes in that happiness. Maybe find reasons why that happiness isn't real, perhaps to make ourselves feel better about our own lack of happiness. Or perhaps there's simply something about happiness that is elusive and surrounded with a little bit of a negative connotation. Sometimes it's more interesting to focus on the struggle, people overcoming things, focusing on the tumultuous journey rather than the happy destination. I think that sometimes in the realms of history and psychology and philosophy, there are many viewpoints that tend to embrace that struggle as well, and might look at something like happiness as something simple and silly in a sense. Le Guin describes this viewpoint of perhaps looking at these citizens of Omelas who are happy and sort of prejudging them as simple and perhaps only people who pursue pleasure at all costs. She says, quote, "Yet I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man, nor make any celebration of joy." End quote. Le Guin is wondering here if the many traditions in philosophy and in religion that tend to embrace this struggle, or at least find ways to work around it, philosophies like Stoicism about embracing struggle, perhaps Taoism coming to peace with that struggle in the world, different religious traditions, maybe Christianity and original sin, sort of the inherent unhappiness of humanity and the ways that that impacts the religious teachings there. In many of these different moral or philosophical traditions, happiness is associated with that hedonistic treadmill, always wanting more, never being satisfied, merely living to satisfy your urges and desires. What was it that Don Draper said? Happiness is the smell of a new car.
You're on top and you don't have enough. You're happy because you're successful for now. But what is happiness? It's a moment before you need more happiness.
So maybe Le Guin is saying, hey, maybe this happiness thing is getting a bad rap. So take away those preconceived notions of what a truly happy society might mean and try to imagine just that, a truly happy society. She describes the city of Omelas with these bells and the music and the flags and the horses. And importantly, she says, hey, if that's not your thing, then just imagine whatever you want, whatever happiness is for you, put it in this city. Pretend it's there. Orgies, fine. Beer, cool. Drugs, whatever. No drugs, okay, that works too. It's about the way that people feel inside the city of Omelas. There is no guilt. There is simply joy and happiness. She says that it is, quote, a boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere, and the splendor of the world's summer. This is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. End quote. But of course, there's one caveat. As the people of Omelas are constantly celebrating life, a child is locked in a dungeon. Le Guin takes a paragraph to describe the situation and makes it pretty clear that this is terrible and not good for the child under any circumstance. It's dark, the floor is wet, it smells, the child is fed once a day. Sometimes the person coming in with the water jug will just kick the child. Torture, abuse, it's all on the table here. And just to twist the knife, Le Guin states that the child actually remembers what it was like to be outside of the cage, which of course makes the imprisonment even worse. She says, quote, the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. I will be good, it says. Please let me out. I will be good. They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining. Ee-ah, ee-ah, and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. End quote. A little bit of a depressing description there, but it's necessary for the story that Le Guin is telling here. It's important to establish that there really is no rationalization you could make that might say that this is actually somehow good for the health of the child, or maybe the child was born and grew up there and therefore they don't know any better, so therefore it might not be as bad. Le Guin is just saying, no, this is terrible and everybody knows it, including the people of Omelas. Because all of that happiness that we talked about earlier rests on that child in the dungeon. In the story, there's some sort of deal that has been struck with the universe, and the terms are that the child needs to stay locked up and needs to endure that pain and torture and misery in order for all of the happiness of Omelas to continue. Every person in the city is aware of this deal. They visit the child from time to time. Le Guin says that sometimes they look at the child and feel pity or sorrow. Sometimes they feel nothing at all, but most simply feel a moment of pity or sadness and go back to living their full and happy lives. But there are also some who, after looking at the child and learning of the deal that allows for the people of Omelas to be happy, take a different path. Le Guin ends the story by saying, quote, at times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who goes to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas, through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow-lit windows, and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist. But they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. End quote. The story ends there with these people who walk away from Omelas. Presumably, they are somehow unhappy or unable to reckon with this deal that has been made where the city of Omelas gets true happiness, but it comes at the cost of imprisoning this little child. But of course, there's much to be left open for interpretation, and there's many questions to ask. Who do those people who walk away from Omelas represent? Why did they leave? Where are they going? What is the story really about? Earlier in the episode, we mentioned this idea of happiness, and Le Guin saying in the story perhaps pure happiness is achievable without any caveats or hedonistic treadmills to run on. But then, of course, she's playing with this idea later in the story because all of that happiness from Omelas that she was describing does come with the catch of the tortured child. So perhaps there is some sort of philosophical point here to be made about the nature of good and evil, the nature of happiness and unhappiness. There could be some sort of yin and yang element where you can't have real happiness without truly knowing and experiencing despair. In the story, Le Guin alludes to this and seemingly states that the people of Omelas are aware of this yin and yang element to their joy and pleasant lives. She says, quote, "It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer." End quote. Maybe it's not possible to be happy without being sad. But then why do the people who decide to walk away from Omelas walk away? Maybe they don't buy that explanation of happiness. Maybe real happiness is possible without suffering. And maybe they're going to try to find a place or make a place where that is possible. So perhaps it's this battle over the philosophical nature of happiness that's going on. Perhaps the ones who leave Omelas are simply disgusted and they refuse to benefit from the horror of what goes on with the child in that dark room every day. This brings us to another fairly common interpretation of this story, which is the nature of exploitation. Obviously, in the story, the people of Omelas are truly happy and living their lives to the fullest, and yet they're all participating in the exploitation and the brutality against this child in the broom closet. How can it be possible to live such happy and pleasant and carefree lives as a child is brutally tortured and abused. I think this might be the question that Ursula Le Guin wants us to ask ourselves and perhaps apply to our own modern world. Some might argue that all of us live in our own personal Omelas. We're all at least somewhat experienced in this sort of hypocrisy of exploitation. Here I am, leisurely reading a short story, pontificating on what it might mean. Pretty soon I'm going to wrap up this recording, take a break for some dinner, maybe watch a movie, go to bed on a comfortable mattress, wake up the next morning, text with friends on my smartphone, etc., etc. And meanwhile, in the time it took to simply speak this sentence, there is exploitation going on in the world, and it's happening on a scale much greater than the child in Omelas. That exploitation is happening in different areas all over the world. Some of it is even directly related to that phone, the mattress, the computer, the TV, that life that I'm living comfortably here. So it's worth asking, am I the same as the people of Omelas? So that could be something that is discussed and debated when reading The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. It might also be a sort of demonstration of two different ethical systems. These two systems are often in conflict with one another, and they're very popular in philosophy and morality and justice. On the one hand, you have utilitarianism. And this is a bit of a simplification, but a lot of times this gets wrapped up with something called consequentialism. And basically the idea is that what matters about a moral choice is the outcome. If the outcome is good, then that choice was the correct one. If the outcome was bad, then that choice was the wrong one. So a utilitarian might look at the situation in Omelas and say, well, it's only one kid, and this kid is, sure, enduring suffering, but we also have to factor in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives that would be ruined if we saved this kid. So in that case, it might be permissible to continue to leave the child in the closet. On the other hand, there's what's called deontology, which instead of looking at the outcome of the choice, it looks at more the choice itself. And there might be hard and fast rules for things you're allowed to do and things you're not allowed to do. In this case, torture and holding a child against his will is wrong. It's evil. And it doesn't matter how many lives might be saved by doing that, you can't do it because it's the wrong choice. And these examples of deontology and utilitarianism and consequentialism are a bit oversimplified here, and there's more to the story in regards to those competing philosophies, but my point is only that one of the ways to read this story might be to hold up your own personal moral code to the story and see what its strengths might be, what its weaknesses might be, where it might hold up strongly or perhaps fall apart. I think that in addition to our moral codes and our philosophies, this short story is great because we can also hold up our understanding of history and our understanding of historical narratives to the story and see what happens. Applying these ideas of exploitation and hypocrisy and happiness that rests on a shaky foundation, to say the least, applying these concepts might help us better understand and grapple with our own history. In what ways are we in the modern day benefiting from the exploitation of people in the past, and to what extent do we acknowledge this as a society, and to what extent do we do something about it? Certainly questions that are more and more timely as of late. But ultimately, I think that The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is such an effective short story because it does hold up that mirror right in front of you and asks you to navigate some murky ethical waters and your own personal journey for happiness. Where is the line in the sand? Is there a red line you wouldn't cross? What would cause you to walk away from Omelas?